we're in the Steel Pan Vibe Spotlight, and Dwayne is going to be interviewing attorney Pepra. She's going to be talking about, she's going to share some insight into the child welfare system and her activities in the Federation of African Liberation Movement. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Right. Good morning, Tierney.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. So our first question is, how did you get into law, and is there a connection between your work as a lawyer and your work as a Pan-Africanist?
So I first got into law. I originally was studying journalism in college, and I took political science as a minor. And I began to become really interested in the political science aspect, particularly when I was learning about the Constitution and how people are supposed to be afforded certain rights. And so at the same point, I was becoming more and more conscious as an African woman. And so it kind of intersected in that I felt like this would be a more appropriate way for me to actually help my people instead of journalism, is to actually go into law. So as far as a Pan-Africanist, that was always my intention, was to help Black people. The more and more I developed over the years, I started learning that, you know, there's other ways, not just inside of America to help people, but there's human rights that can actually help Black people. And so I would say it started more as an idea of helping the African American community, but now as I've grown into a Pan-Africanist, it has developed into a tool to be used to help the African community internationally.
Okay, and in your practice as an attorney, to what degree does the current family structure of absent fathers impact the welfare and the well-being of children, especially children of African descent? And how serious is the problem, and how should the community respond to this problem?
The problem is very serious, and, you know, I see the interesting thing about me is that I have a mixture of clients, and I get to see how different families are treated inside of the child welfare system. The one thing that I have observed is that throughout the years inside of America, throughout history, a lot of the legal system, a lot of the policies that have been implemented in the United States have been really used to dismantle the Black family. And so what we have today in the child welfare system is we have a number of laws that have kind of created this environment where Black families who are already damaged from years of institutional racism, already damaged from slavery, already damaged from the prison industrial complex, now who are put into this position where they're being judged by these outsiders. And a lot of times these outsiders aren't necessarily thinking about keeping the family together. That's something that I'm more and more becoming aware of, is that a lot of times they're more so inflicting their views of what looks appropriate to, as a family, their views of what should be a safe environment unto the Black family. And so it creates this effect where you have a lot of Black families who are being looked at under a microscope. There are cultural differences. There are just differences as far as if you come into a courtroom and you are Black, you know, you're assumed to be of a certain type of lifestyle. And that definitely affects the treatment that families receive. And so a lot of, you know, my experience thus far has driven me to think that a lot of work has to be put towards keeping families together, not just for the parents, but really for the children, because when you separate children from their parents, there's just so many studies talking about the difficulties that child will have in their life. And so it's definitely something that I see. It's definitely something that I'm trying to work to develop a plan or some type of plan of action to do something about it. But it's a very common issue inside of the child welfare system.
Okay, do you think there's an overrepresentation of African Americans in the welfare system? And if so, what are the contributing factors and what can be done about this?
Well, everyone acknowledges that there's an overrepresentation. There's basically two schools of thought. The one school of thought is that the reason why there's an overrepresentation is because Black families are basically poorer, which we do know that Black families are poorer, and that because of poverty, there are different things that happen within the Black family that might not happen in the white family. I think this point is very overstated, because even there have been studies that have been conducted that even with poverty in white families and poverty with Black families, whenever you have the same factors that are present, you still see more efforts to actually reunify white families. You still see more reluctance as far as the child welfare agencies to actually remove the children from the family, and you see more effort to actually try to give the family services. So instead of completely removing a child and putting them in a system, you might have parenting classes, you might have therapy, mentors. And so there's definitely an overrepresentation. The question is, where does it come from? I think it comes from a number of factors. Obviously, our history, we've been very damaged. But on the other hand, you have legislation that has been enforced in a way that disproportionately affects Black families. The American and Families Adoption Safe Act, ASFA, which was implemented in the 90s, really did cause a drastic increase in Black families in the foster system, because a lot of the stereotypes that were going around at that time were of the welfare queen, of the Black family that's dysfunctional. And so as a result, you've seen a drastic increase inside of a lot of out-of-home placements for African-American children.
Okay, in a study of the child welfare system, a direct service worker stated that the child welfare system is a reaction to how society has fallen apart in the African American community. There is no culture. There's poverty, drugs, teen pregnancies, and no fathers at home. So we take the kids in, clean them, and put them out. But the problems started a long time ago. Do you think this is an accurate statement, and is there an endgame?
Yeah, it's definitely an accurate statement. I think that the child welfare system is really a result of a lot of failed, not just policies, but institutional racism. I think more and more people are starting to see the interception of the prison industrial complex in the child welfare system. I think particularly with Black families, that is one of the major factors that does keep families separate. For example, let's say you have just someone who, let's say an African American dad, and he's in the court, and let's say, in his teenage years, he was arrested for some type of drug-related offense. That follows him, and the child welfare agencies are going to use that to further basically cast this picture of this person that is unable to take care of their child, or who is unsafe for their child, although this could have been something that was a juvenile offense that has nothing to do with them, who they are 10 or 15 years into the future. And so it's an interception of all of these systems, and really it's about the failure of society, I would say. But, then I personally believe that the system is actually doing what it was created to do, when you look at a systems analysis, because it's basically keeping families apart. It's not giving adequate services to Black families as it does to white families or even Latino families. And so there's a question of, is it a failure of the system, or is it that the system was never created to produce positive results for African children? I'm more and more becoming convinced of the later.
Mm. Okay, Tyranny Peprah, this is Barbara Roden, the host of the Steel Pan Vibes radio show. Welcome to the Steel Pan Vibes Spotlight. We're going to take a quick break, and Dwayne is going to continue.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, folks, you're listening to the Steel Pan Vibes. It's more than music radio show, on Facebook, on the radio, tune in, wherever you are. We are in the middle of an interview here with attorney Tyranny Peprah, and the interview is conducted by law student Dwayne Akio Wang Omowali. And we're going to get right back.
Okay. Please explain to our listeners what the Federation of African Liberation is and why the FLA was put together.
So the Federation of African Liberation is a Pan-Africanist organization that was created as a means to try to connect Africans throughout the diaspora with Africans on the continent for the purpose of liberation for all of us. So we know that Africans in the homeland are facing all types of oppression, from neocolonialism, colonialism, imperialism, and we know that these fights, these struggles are directly linked to the struggles that we face in the United States. Black people, we are basically being subjugated to a similar type of system as colonialism. So if we understand that these systems are so similar and that they really come from the same source, then if we're actually fighting these systems from our different vantage points throughout the world, then we actually have more effectiveness at actually overcoming white supremacy as an international force. So that's basically what the organization was created to do. As far as how we came together, I came together with a number of people, including you, Dwayne, and we basically we wanted to create what Malcolm had in mind originally when he created the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And, it does differ a lot from the Organization of Afro-American Unity because, of course, at that time when Malcolm X did create that organization, you also had the Organization of African Unity in Africa, which was very much a Pan-Africanist organization on the continent. Unfortunately, not yet. We haven't yet seen an organization that has been as strong as the Organization of African Unity on the continent. So what FAL does seek to do is not just represent Africans in the Americas, but also encourage Africans in the continent by either, we're open to having FAL chapters, but we're also open to just collaborating with African organizations that are Pan-Africanist and uniting with each other for the purpose of all of us fighting this global white supremacy that we have been subjected to.
Why do you think Pan-Africanism is so important for African people?
It's important because it's the only solution. If you look at the way that other groups conduct themselves, if you look at the way that that Europeans conduct themselves, they are practicing a form of basically Pan-Europeanism or Pan-Asian. They're practicing coalitions. They're practicing power by way of identifying that these people are similarly situated and we have similar interests. And since we have these similar interests, we have to unite if we're actually going to become the most dominant. And that's what has really worked when you look at the people who are most in power. And so when you look at, for example, the European Union, or if you look at things that happen in the United States, they recognize that if something happens in the U.S., that directly affects the European Union. It directly affects any of the European countries. It directly affects Israel, which is a satellite of European countries. So they're practicing their own form of the same strategy. And so if anything, Pan-Africanism is a reaction to this global force. And, it was originally, we might have been living separately, but we understand now that if we're going to have an effective fight against this global force, we have to unite together and we have to identify that we have the same interests as being the same people.
Malcolm X held the view that our struggle in America isn't necessarily a struggle of civil rights, but a problem of human rights. Is this a view that you share, and can you explain the difference between a struggle for civil rights and a struggle for human rights?
It's definitely a view that I share. Even if you look at, honestly, the issues that we have in the United States, we call them civil rights, but they're actually human rights. And I'll look at the foster system, for example. If we look at the way that black children are treated disproportionately to white children, this is not just a civil rights issue. This is a human rights issue because all of these things come from things that affect humans altogether, such as colonialism, slavery, and there are laws inside of the international system to actually protect African people from these types of things. So the issue is us identifying that these aren't just civil rights; these are bigger than civil rights, and actually taking our petitions for remedies of equality outside of the domain of the United States. And to Malcolm, it was taking it to the United Nations. I personally don't believe that the United Nations would necessarily they might issue declarations, but they're not necessarily going to march into the United States because the United States is causing hell for African people. But however, what I do think is that if we use platforms such as the United Nations to spread awareness on the condition of our people and the fact that these institutions actually do not service our people, then that creates an atmosphere where we're holding these institutions accountable, and if they're not answering our people, then we can actually form our own international bodies that we can discuss human rights issues instead of relying on the United Nations.
2019 has been designated as the year of return by Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo. You visited Ghana last year. Could you please tell our listeners what that experience was like for you?
It was an amazing experience. My husband is Ghanaian, and so I've been wanting to travel there for a long time. For me, it was really it was more of a spiritual journey. You know, I've always felt disconnected being here in the United States and never going to the place where my ancestors were taken from. And I wanted to, for their legacy, actually go back to their homeland and actually see what it was about. Going there, you know, it was an amazing experience. I got to see, you know, one of the slave castles in Elmina, and that was just a very great experience. And so getting to actually feel what my people were robbed of, and that is history, culture, and a legacy, that was an amazing experience for me.
One of the reasons why many Africans in the diaspora feel indifferent to traveling to Africa or indifferent to Pan-Africanism is the perception that people on the African continent do not like African Americans. Based on your experiences in traveling to Ghana, would you say that this is an accurate perception? And if not, where do you think this perception comes from?
Not at all. I honestly don't feel, looking back on my trip, I don't remember any time where I never felt welcome. I felt very welcome. I felt very embraced, meeting, you know, whether it's my husband's family or just family, friends, or people in the street. Everyone was very, you know, people embraced me. Even, you know, some people, they wanted to encourage, you know, me, like, you know, you should learn Twi, you should learn your actual language. And that was very inspiring in that aspect. I think a lot of that mentality comes from Africans in America who might have experienced negative experiences with Africans who immigrate to America. And we should know that in the same way that those Africans who immigrate to America might have a negative experience with Africans who are already in America, that having that one experience should not be the totality of how you view all of those people. And so the same way that if you want to find an African who does not like you, I promise you can find it. And that will back up your theology or your ideology. In the same way, if I want to find one who does love me and does welcome me, I can find that also. It's all about what you want to see and what you choose to ignore.
In what ways do you think the African diaspora can contribute to Africa's development?
In many ways. It's very interesting when you look at what's going on as far as Africa right now. It's basically, as many people have called it, it's the last frontier, meaning this is the last place where it has not been tapped out of resources. It's the last place that has so much potential in the world. And so obviously everywhere else in the world has been colonized severely to the point where there's really no form of there's really no gain that you can really get from most of those regions. Well, Africa, of course, has been colonized. There's still so much left that you have people like China, the Chinese, you have the Arabs, and of course you have the Europeans who are trying to get their last foothold on the region, on the continent of Africa. And so one of the ways that I think that we can actually help develop Africa is by buying land. This is something that I'm actually working on now as far as me. But if you actually look at what's going on in Africa as far as the population boom, a lot of people outside of Africa are very nervous because they know that once the population gets out of hand, which has been predicted that within the next few years, the population is going to drastically increase, that's going to be a lot of scramble for resources. One of the ways that we can actually help secure our people is to actually own land and have housing so that when the population does reach this proportion, we can actually help and assist with those people having somewhere to stay.
Okay, the steel pan was invented in Trinidad and Tobago by young men of African descent. And our final question for this interview will be, can you please tell our listeners a little bit about what you know of the steel pan and also anything that interests you about the steel pan while you were doing your research on the instrument?
Well, I didn't know about it previous to this interview. You actually sent me some information, and I looked into it. And to me, it's a showing of the endurance of the African legacy, the fact that no matter how much colonialism has tried to prevent us from having connection to our homeland, that we've always found ways to ingrain our original culture into our culture wherever we are in the diaspora. And so to me, it was a sign of resistance. It's a showing that even whenever we are being forced and conditioned to assimilate into European civilization or the way that they want us to see ourselves, that we can maintain our culture in innovative ways that has has meaning, to our people and to our culture. So it's a sign of, I think, of just the resilience of African people wherever we go.
All right. Oh, that concludes the interview. Thank you, Tierney, for agreeing to come on and be our guest for today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, folks. Well, that was Tierney. How do you say her last name?
Pepra.
Pepra. She's an attorney involved in the child welfare system and also a Pan-Africanist. Dwayne, what I do like about her suggestion into how we can contribute to Africa's development, buying land. Buying land. So folks, you have a little couple of $1,000s to put away. Hey, go invest in Africa. I mean, it's the most resourceful continent in the world, so you are going to get a return on your investment. Okay, folks, that's it. The last word. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is like a broken winged bird that cannot fly. That's Langston Hughes. Taking us home is Ron Reed on pan, David Happy Williams on bass, Orville Wright on keys, doing Happy's composition, Keep the Master in Mind, from the album Read, Write, and Be Happy on the Sanch label. So, folks, until next time, let your brilliance shine. Stay strong, stay focused, be encouraged, have a safe, healthy, and prosperous new year. May God bless you all.